Good evening, everyone. We're just going to take a couple more minutes until 6:05 to begin. I encourage you, please feel free to get some water, take a stretch. We'll start in just a couple of minutes. Good evening, everyone. We'll just take one more minute to welcome folks to arrive. Before we begin, I want to invite the interpreters to share information for people who may wish to access Spanish and ASL interpretation.
Buenas noches. Los organizadores del evento de hoy tienen la firme determinación de crear un espacio multilingüe y con esa finalidad contamos con interpretación disponible en español e inglés. Les pedimos a todos los participantes que hablen lentamente y en voz alta y clara en sus micrófonos para facilitar la interpretación. Al terminar este anuncio activaremos la función de interpretación y si usted está usando la aplicación Zoom, podrá ver el icono de un mundo en la parte de abajo de su pantalla. Haga un clic en el icono para escuchar la interpretación y seleccione español. Si usted está usando la aplicación Zoom desde su teléfono, haga clic en los tres puntitos donde dice More o Más, seleccione Language Interpretation o Interpretación de Idiomas y después Spanish o Español. Si tiene algún problema al hacer esto, por favor escriba un comentario en el chat. Gracias.
All right. Good evening and warm blessings to everyone for joining us tonight for Decolonize CUNY and NYC with ASL interpretation by Andrea and Brandon and Spanish interpretation by Aldo and Ali, which is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. This is the last of 7 online public events for the November through January residency, radiating Black Puerto Rican feminist studies from the City University of New York to the Americas and the Caribbean, coordinated with the Brooklyn Community Arts Center Wendy's Subway, with support from several spaces in the City University. The CUNY Graduate Center's Lost and Found, the CUNY Poetics Document Initiative from the Center for the Humanities, and the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics. Also at Brooklyn College, the Ethel R. Wolf Institute for the Humanities, Africana Studies Department, American Studies Program, and Puerto Rican and Latino Studies Department. Also at City College, the Latin American and Latino Studies Program. My name is Connor Tomas Reed, welcoming all pronouns. I also go by Coco. I currently teach at Brooklyn College, and I organize with Free CUNY and Rank and File Action. I wish to thank tonight's participating organizations, the American Indian Community House, Brooklyn College Anti-Racist Coalition, Free CUNY, North Bronx Collective, and Rank and File Action, as well as the Wendy's Subway team, in particular, Rachel Valinsky, Sunny Ayer, and Aru Apasa, and all of you for joining us for this very powerful event. I invite everyone to share in the chat where you're connecting from so we can learn how far and wide we're reaching towards each other tonight. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm reaching to you from the homeland of the Lenape and Canarsie people, which is and always has been a place of indigenous movement. Our work today and ongoing, at its most fundamental level, is in solidarity with the Lenape, Canarsie, and all indigenous peoples, here and beyond, whose land was stolen to create settler states, and who continue to live under siege, surveillance, and colonial structural violence on their own occupied land. We align with all those advancing indigenous resurgence and decolonization in the face of colonial oppression. We support the return of their lands. This acknowledgement is a call to commit and to take on the responsibility to dismantle the ongoing effects of settler colonialism. This is where, together, we must begin and persist. What would it mean to decolonize CUNY and the city of New York? I invite you all to take a moment to imagine what this would be like, using all of your senses. We could begin by thinking of the physical land and the environment that our university and city are built upon and operate within. Who decides which priorities on how it's cared for? We could also think of which resources are essential to the daily functioning of CUNY and the city, especially now during the pandemic, and whose labor makes this happen. I'll give two recent examples. A cut cable in Brooklyn on Wednesday led to internet outages on the East Coast, and a week-long Hunts Point strike in the Bronx this mid-January won inspiring gains for immigrant workers who distribute 60% of the entire city's produce. How are our social needs met in ways that reinforce or challenge unsustainable extraction and displacement? We could also think of which forms of learning, work, and shelter are encouraged, enforced, or withheld. And we could think of the relationships that we practice with each other, our families, friends, co-workers, students, neighbors, and even with ourselves, as well as with those who exert control over all of our lives. These questions are vast, but they're ultimately rooted in the themes of power, relationships, and the material world. Kei-Wen Yang, Eve Tuck, and Angela Davis remind us that decolonization and abolition are neither metaphors nor solely negating demands. This is a tangible, embodied, relational, proactive, creative process that requires joy and trust to take great risks to transform our lives and to repair the ecosystem. This means wresting power away from those, all of those, who wish to maintain settler colonialism, a social structure that is upheld by anti-Black racism, anti-immigrant xenophobia, and ecological destruction. But to do this, decolonization also means moving closer into complicity with each other. Tonight's event proposes that our movements are already entwined, but that we need to develop a more consciously shared ecosystem of strategies across CUNY's 25 campuses and across New York City's 5 boroughs, now more than ever. So when all of you hear from these organizers tonight, please listen for ways to bridge these anti-colonial efforts and consider their projects your own to help flourish. I'm very honored to introduce the following participants. I'll read their organization bios, and then we'll hear from them in this order. We'll have ample time afterwards for questions and answers and dialogue. So along the way, I encourage everyone to write down your ideas and your thoughts to share after these presentations. First, we'll hear from Rick Chavala with the American Indian Community House, a 501c3 not-for-profit organization serving the needs of Native Americans residing in New York City. AICH's mission is to improve and promote the well-being of the American Indian community and to increase the visibility of American Indian cultures in an urban setting in order to cultivate awareness, understanding, and respect. Then we'll hear from Lawrence Joseph with the Brooklyn College Anti-Racist Coalition, or ARC, which is comprised of students, staff, and faculty who recognize that systemic racism is a primary impediment to institutional change at Brooklyn College. They are adamant that white supremacy is only recognized through power relations, and that its dismantling requires self-determination and control over material resources as the only means of implementing institutional change. We'll then hear from Lucien Baskin with Free CUNY, a student-led CUNY-wide organization working for a free and liberatory university. Free CUNY's vision is rooted in the long history of Black and Brown working-class student organizing at CUNY and incorporates anti-racist and abolitionist principles in their work. Free CUNY advocates for a tuition-free university, as well as for free Metro cards and childcare, zero-cost classes, and many other ways to transform the university. We'll then hear from Lori Kim Alexander, Alicia Grullon, and Vani Cannon with the North Bronx Collective, a group of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and queer Black, Indigenous, people of color women artists, educators, community gardeners, and longtime local organizers spearheading popular initiatives against policing, gentrification, and food apartheid. They're committed to community and democratic control of land, institutions, and resources, and are against the rule of property, the power of the carceral state, and the ongoing legacy of colonialism. And finally, we'll get to hear from Karina Mullen and Reiko Tahara with Rank and File Action, or RAFA, a group of militant rank and file activists at CUNY challenging the culture of austerity in higher education and demanding a more democratic fighting union, the Professional Staff Congress. RAFA stands for participatory, inclusive, democratic unionism and grassroots militant working class organizing for a vibrant and fully funded People's University, one that supports the basic needs of students, staff, and faculty, and challenges the multiple oppressions harming our communities. All right, so let's get into it. I first want to welcome Rick to share some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ijan Connor, for inviting me to be here and that fabulous introduction about what we're going to speak about today. And Welcome Miu Temenue, Nyapa Richivoye, Nishi, Ijan. Welcome you in one of the many, many indigenous languages of what we now call the Americas. My indigenous language of Kumeyaay, and also wishing that the fire within all of you continue to burn bright. And it's really good to be here. And it's a pretty enormous subject we're tackling here. So in a very short time, I'll try to just bring forth maybe a few ideas that are worth listening to. And I say that because there are so many amazing people on this panel that have so many ideas And I like to begin by pointing out that one of the first ways that we can decolonize is to have humility. And for indigenous people, there's no more essential quality that we can carry in all of our learning, in all of our life ways as humility. And I say that partly because sometimes that's something that isn't present all the time in universities. And I know because I've worked for many years at colleges and universities, and one of the things that interrupts or serves as a barrier to learning from one another, and in particular, really assuming a good way with each other and moving decolonization forward, is that there's simply not the humility that's required to listen to the teachings that are required to just even begin to do the serious work of decolonization. And for CUNY, I don't not had the opportunity to work a great deal with CUNY, but I do know a lot of people who've worked in the system, who've been students with CUNY, and I know that this is not what I'm saying far away from some of their experiences. That in their attempts to move the universities, the institutions in a particular way, oftentimes meets with a standing arrogance and a feeling that they don't really have the knowledge to bring to an institution in its efforts to change in the best ways. So I would start with that, and I would also say that there in an institution or a body of institutions like the CUNY system, there needs to be a start with the true acknowledgement and the true responsibility that goes with acknowledging that you are in fact on the indigenous land. And I acknowledge where I am on Lenape land when I'm in New York City. I'm currently in Arizona, the ancestral land of the Hohokam and on the sovereign land of the Tohono O'odham. And I always recognize that, and I think about that in the way I do my work and I lead my life. And that's the first thing that I would say any sort of institutional body needs to do when they think about decolonizing. And from my knowledge, and please people correct me if I'm wrong, I've never seen that happen within the CUNY system. I've never seen any kind of official recognition of an acknowledgement of both whose land they're on and the responsibility that entails. And to say that we are committed to fulfilling the responsibility that we know that means when we say that we are in fact on indigenous land, on Lenape land, on the indigenous land wherever the institutions may be. And that's really where things begin. And from there, once that starts to really take place, then you can start getting into the very, very practical, more specific kinds of actions and efforts that need to take place. And I know just from the little bit of work that I've done with the CUNY system and also with other educational institutions. I worked with NYU for a number of years, and I've worked with students and faculty at Columbia, and I've spent time doing a fair amount of work with a number of other institutions around the city. And so I do understand some of what's been done already and what continues to need to be done. And among those many things is that there needs to be a way in which indigenous knowledge in a really serious way is brought into those institutions. And we know the ways in which it takes place through curriculum, through hiring, through hiring faculty and staff and administrators at all levels, of bringing more students in, of recognizing the students who are there already. Because believe me, there's indigenous students in the CUNY system now, and they come from all over. And oftentimes they may be more easily identified, for instance, as students whose origin is in Latin America, but oftentimes those students are in fact indigenous. And if they were acknowledged and recognized as such, and there was knowledge brought into the system and people brought into the system and brought into those institutions, that were able to speak to those students, they certainly would express their identity as indigenous. But in some ways, there's no room to even do that. And so that's the first thing, is that there needs to be a building of a curriculum and faculty and research and all the methodologies and pedagogies and epistemologies have to start reflecting indigenous knowledge and indigenous people and indigenous nations. And so those are the kind of things that need to take place. And you know, in steps that are can be quite immediate and quite doable, it can start to happen, where faculty who are already there can start to really educate themselves on the way indigenous knowledge informs the work that they do, no matter what field they're in. Because I think we all know that regardless of what field somebody is in, from art to architecture, from the sciences to politics, you name it, any field you wish, often, in fact, in any given subject area, there's going to be a fundamental knowledge, indigenous knowledge that can speak and can inform those studies. And so certainly we want indigenous studies. That's something that always needs to be part of an institutional curriculum, and that needs to happen at CUNY. But in addition to having indigenous studies, there needs to be a real commitment to bringing indigenous knowledge into all fields, into all disciplines, in all the work that's being done at a university. And that can be done step by step. That's something that someone could start today, immediately. And if even individual faculty and administrators and students started making the commitment and calling on institutions to make that commitment, there could be those kinds of changes very, very quickly. And oftentimes I believe that that's the way momentum is built. That's the way sovereignty is built. That's the way self-determination is built, is through the ongoing actions of people who know they can do these things. And from that, it gives you the strength and the leverage to be able to make the institutional systemic changes, and to be calling for those institutional systemic changes, and to be able to show there's already examples of this sovereign indigenous work going on within the institution. And I think that's the work that's being done all the time by people within institutions, and it needs to just keep growing. And I believe it can. And I believe along with that, there's always a need for the values that are indigenous, around humility, around sovereignty, around acknowledgement and recognition of the land and relations, and building relations with all of our relatives, of all relatives, non-human and those who we know bring us life, and bring us all the energy and the spirit that we need every day to make sure that we're in good relations with all of those relatives all the time. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for getting us started, Rick. Lawrence, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Connor. Let me begin by saying Uhuru. Uhuru is a Swahili word that means freedom. It was popularized during the 1970s organizing that emphasized the notion of African internationalism, a concept virtually absent in mainstream US Black politics today. Uhuru also locates my own upbringing in Chicago, where many of the community organizers in my youth would preface their words by saying Uhuru. This was to emphasize that freedom was the goal and what was to be achieved, not something that we already had. As we begin our semester today at Brooklyn College and throughout CUNY, I began our 16 weeks by challenging students to think about different ideas of freedom. My goal is to help them arrive at the meaningful point when they realize that freedom is something that they have to fight for. It is tied to their existence. Decolonization, properly understood, makes this clear. That is why settler colonialism and anti-Blackness as principal forms of oppression are foregrounded in the anti-racist coalition's politics. In my limited time, I want to briefly answer 4 questions that shape and frame my understanding of ARC and what type of struggle we are engaging in at Brooklyn College. First, what is the meaning of decolonization? Rather than offering a definition, I want to start with a quote from Frantz Fanon, who I consider my North Star when thinking about colonialism in basic and most far-reaching, in the most basic and far-reaching terms. When analyzing decolonization, Fanon describes affective conditions, how we feel, how the colonized felt in this process. We know decolonization is in effect because Fanon states, in actual fact, proof of success lies in a social fabric that has been changed from the inside out. This change is extraordinarily important because it is desired, clamored for, and demanded. The need for this change exists in a raw, repressed, and reckless state in the lives and consciousness of colonized men and women, end quote. In this chapter of The Wretched of the Earth, he identifies the conditions of violence rooted in a compartmentalized structure. Sorry for the dog barking. He identifies the conditions of violence rooted in a compartmentalized structure that exalts the colonist and degrades the colonized. Decolonization is a violent process that begins with the purging of the system of meaning that orders the colony and the world. In a sense, decolonization begins with chaos and a breakdown of meaning, which then clears the path to the new self for the colonized. In this new beginning is experienced, quote, is experienced as a terrifying future in the consciousness of another species of men and women, the colonist. We are far removed from the context of the wretched of the earth taking place in North and West Africa during the 1950s and 1960s. However, where Fanon is most important to us is that we have to challenge the narcissistic identities set in place by colonialism. This challenge might be most difficult in the US for the mere factor that we do not see ourselves as a settler colony and that we are far removed from the world that Fanon describes. Most discourses about race assume progress, though through eventual integration and assimilation, rather than a rupture that creates a new human being. The entire discourse surrounding the Capitol building seizure earlier this month was a delusional discourse about a threatened democracy, narcissism at its finest. My second question, what does decolonization look like in the US and Brooklyn College? Here again, Fanon is instructional. Quote, in capitalist societies, education, whether secular or religious, the teaching of moral reflexes handed down from father to son, the exemplary integrity of workers decorated after 50 years of loyal and faithful service, the fostering of love for harmony and wisdom, those aesthetic forms of respect for the status quo, instill in the exploited a mood of submission and inhibition which considerably eases the task of the agents of law and order. In capitalist countries, a multitude of sermonizers, counselors, confusion mongers intervene between the exploited and the authorities. As an educator, if decolonization is to be real, I have to solve this order and be part of a process in which students begin to reject the standard education. The order reproducing curriculum and pedagogy and help them see themselves as agents in a process that strike at the core of the Western world. I have to be a different type of professor. I have to be more than critical, but inventive. We study Marx not for a proletarian revolution, but to understand that the proletariat also has to be reborn, for he is also made of a bourgeois imagination that describes the human primarily in economic productive capacities. Antagonist.
Lawrence, a request to go a little more slowly so the interpreters can get all the magic.
Certainly.
Thank you. We're with you.
So we study Marx, not for a proletarian revolution, but to understand that the proletariat has to be reborn. For he is also made of a bourgeois imagination that describes the human primarily in economic, productive capacities, anthrocentric, antagonistic, and alienated, destructive to the earth, animals, and all other possibilities of humanity. Decolonization at Brooklyn College and CUNY is the beginning of a process where this institution becomes unidentifiable in its current form. The college must reflect the people, namely the students, and education has to be replaced with a whole new set of symbols, meanings, and validating knowledge. Third question, why does the Anti-Racist Coalition make solidarity between students, staff, and faculty primary? In our everyday lives, we exist in relationships based on hierarchy. Hierarchies that are made for society exist in all the ways that ensures the status quo. I think we all recognize and understand that anyone can learn something from everyone. One does not challenge racism from only being in a position of knowing. One does not challenge patriarchy through passive acceptance. And a student does not change the world if they are force-fed some version of reality by a professor rather than proffering their own understanding of reality. As long as staff members are only respected as functionaries rather than agents of freedom, then we continue to subscribe to the value of the title rather than the inherent dignity of the human. Each of AICH's 6 demands are tactical and steps towards a new Brooklyn College, and we must be invested in this across our positions. Our first demand, shared governance. Second, staff advocacy. Third, fundraising for anti-racist projects. Fourth, the hiring and retention of critical Black, Latinx, and Native faculty, indigenous faculty. Fifth, anti-racist pedagogy. And sixth, the removal of the NYPD from campus are the targets to help us imagine what does not currently exist. For the last semester, we have focused on anti-racist pedagogy, and the aim of this project is to really change the conversation that we're having at Brooklyn College away from the more liberal discourses about racism, where we assume progress, integration, assimilation, and more so along the lines of a decolonized way of thinking. And of course, this comes in many different forms, but some of the things that we're seeking, and we're always gracious for support, is to really get people from the outside of the college to apply pressure. One of the things that we're trying to do is to bring in outside consultants that can facilitate a change of discourse, but also seeking comrades and allies throughout the CUNY system. Also, we are beginning a reading group where we emphasize indigenous knowledges and of course, radical traditions, Black radical tradition. So we seek this ongoing radical pedagogy, anti-racist project as a part of our ongoing efforts. My fourth and last question asks, why must we fight liberalism / neoliberalism with a transformative solidarity? The basic condition of domination at the heart of colonialism is the notion of the individual, what Sylvia Wynter calls the overrepresentation of a specific genre of man that has come to represent the human. This is the idea of individual rights, individual liberty, freedom, and all of the things that market promises of individual wealth for those who are rational and self-interested. It is these powerful ideas and symbols that are continuously reinscribed in everyday speech, instructions, and even notions of social justice. But freedom cannot be individual or partial based on one's status in a system. Transformative solidarity becomes real when the when the social conditions that are made acceptable by friendly appeals are no longer acceptable. We do not decolonize by measuring progress by an absence of overt racism, but an ability to displace the Western imagination with a new sensibility and desire for something that does not exist, but must. I'll end with Fanon, who recognized that everyday people, the revolutionaries, were clear where they stood in the face of liberal slogans of democracy, rights, wealth, and liberty. In the period of decolonization, the colonized masses thumbs their noses at these very values, shower them with insults, and vomit them up. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. That was fantastic. We'll next get to hear from Lucien with Free CUNY. Please go ahead.
Hey everyone, thank you for coming out tonight. I'm speaking from unceded Lenape land, and I want to start off by thanking Coco and the Wendy's Subway crew for including us as Free CUNY in this amazing residency. I also want to thank the different people doing ASL and Spanish interpretation, and the comrades from the American Indian Community House, Anti-Racist Coalition, North Bronx Collective, and Rank and File Action. So Free CUNY is a student-led, CUNY-wide organization working for a free and liberatory university. Our vision of a free CUNY is rooted in the long history of Black and Brown working class student organizing at CUNY and incorporates anti-racist and abolitionist as well as anti-imperialist principles in our work. Free CUNY advocates for a tuition-free university, as well as for free Metro cards and childcare, zero-cost classes, and many other ways to transform our university. While we are a newer collective of students, workers, and community members, we are located within a much longer history of struggle at the City University of New York. From the communists that organized at City College in the 1930s to the Black and Puerto Rican students who occupied that same campus in 1969 on strike for open admissions, to the tens of thousands of students who took to the streets in 1995 to shut the city down over an austerity budget, to CUNY and the Hunter students who were receiving welfare, mostly women, who organized and demanded their place in this public university. So I'm now going to talk about a few of the different projects that Free CUNY has taken on over the past year, many of which are ongoing projects. So the first of those is an event we organized in solidarity with the January 31st FTP3 Solidarity Day of Action. So this was an event we organized with the People's Cultural Plan, Teens Take Charge, Yaya Youth Network, other students, parents, teachers, artists, community members. We organized a speak out for cop-free schools, subways, CUNY, city, in solidarity with the FTP coalition. This was centered around 5 demands, which I'll read now. Abolish educational apartheid, free and fully fund CUNY, make the MTA work for New Yorkers, no cops or military in our schools and universities, and disarm, divest, and abolish the NYPD. So we really see settler colonialism, militarism, and carceralism as being interlinked systems that work together. And Free CUNY has engaged in Palestine solidarity work alongside other groups at CUNY, such as the Palestine Solidarity Association at Hunter College, Students for Justice in Palestine at a number of campuses, as well as opposing the military and CIA recruitment of students across the CUNY system, preying on working class Black and Brown students. So we see decolonization not as a struggle that can be waged within the confines of nation states and borders, but as an international struggle. And that's particularly true as we organize within CUNY, within New York, and within the United States as spaces that are deeply powerful in terms of the colonial makeup of the world, where our institutions have power and violence that goes far beyond our geographic area. So another campaign that we have worked on is called A for All. And this was a student and professor kind of co-collaborative campaign for grade abolition in and beyond the pandemic. It disrupts the hierarchy of the university as its students and faculty working together to rethink, reimagine, create classrooms centered around learning and supporting one another instead of grading, which is a very colonial, capitalistic, individualistic way of structuring a classroom space that promotes competition and not care. So by giving an A to all students, we reject the logics of that competition, that merit, the scarcity that structures so much of CUNY, particularly in the wake of kind of the past 2 decades with Macaulay Honors College and other honors programs, making it a sort of more elite and segregated university. So we're creating new possibilities for care, learning, and also organizing in and also beyond the classroom and the university. And then the third project I want to talk about that we've done this past year was a mutual aid project. So Free CUNY Mutual Aid Network sought to immediately support community members, including but not limited to CUNY students, whose needs were and continue to be unmet by the university and government during the pandemic. Alongside amazing work by other mutual aid projects in the city, such as the KCC Urban Farm at Kingsborough Community College, which distributed free, fresh, local Brooklyn-grown vegetables to CUNY students and other community members. Also, the North Bronx Collective, which you'll hear from in a few minutes, does amazing mutual aid work. So within that kind of ecosystem of mutual aid and community care, we're part of a larger movement. And the city filled this summer with gardens and community fridges that showed that another world, one free of anti-Black violence at the hands of the police and other institutions, including sometimes professors at CUNY and administrators at CUNY, it's not only possible, but it already exists in fragments and pieces, experiments and possibilities. And those are the words of a CUNY geographer professor and abolitionist organizer, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore. So a question that we've been grappling with, and I think that this whole evening is about grappling with, is what it means to do decolonial work at CUNY and in New York. And I want to turn to Kei-Wen Yang and CUNY alum and Indigenous education scholar Eve Tuck, who Connor mentioned briefly in the introductory remarks, who teach us that decolonization is not a metaphor. And I think this is really important to remember as we're doing this work, that organizing at a settler university on stolen land, on stolen Lenape land, it is not enough to make the land acknowledgement statements that decolonial student organizing at CUNY means being in solidarity with Indigenous communities and Indigenous movements in the city and also in our university today. And that's something I think that Free CUNY has at times fallen short of doing, but we will work to do a better job of that going forward because it's too important not to. So now I want to talk a little bit about the upcoming campaign that Free CUNY is launching this year. And this is a tuition strike campaign, which will be a radical campaign to build worker, student, community power across the university and across the city. By collectively withholding tuition, we are seizing power from the very privatization of CUNY that has oppressed students for decades. So the strike is centered around 5 demands that attempt to unsettle the coloniality of the university. So the first demand is that we demand free tuition and the transformation of university government at the City University of New York. And it's really important to note that this includes the abolition of the Board of Trustees of CUNY, which is one of the most powerful bodies within the university and is supposed to advocate for the university, but instead works to further austerity and policies that hurt students and workers and the surrounding communities. The second demand is that we demand an investment in resources which nourish students in all aspects of life at the City University of New York. There's so many countless opportunities and possibilities for this, many of which are already taking place at CUNY. Community farms, free childcare, resources for survivors of sexual violence, housing. And here I want to note that we really need to think about what it means to decolonize the university, where 22% of the indigenous students are unhoused, and a majority, 62%, are housing insecure on their own stolen land. And also those numbers amidst the current COVID pandemic are likely higher, as these are statistics from a few years ago. The third demand is that we demand a transformation of faculty and staff working conditions at the City University of New York. And so, of course, this first means stop firing adjuncts, which happened in the fall and which CUNY wants to do again in the spring. This is something that adjuncts are organizing against throughout the system. The rank and file action, we'll hear from in a few minutes, Cut COVID Not CUNY, Queens College Adjuncts Unite, countless people within the Professional Staff Congress. There's a large movement. And they've organized around last semester, against an investment, or for an investment in, rather than an attempt to dismantle the most radical and I would say the most important programs within CUNY: queer studies, women, gender, and sexuality studies, feminist studies, ethnic studies, Black studies, Asian American studies, Puerto Rican studies. These were the gains of the CUNY student movement across decades, particularly in the 1969 and 1970 moment. And the administration continues to this day to try to dismantle and destroy those programs because they know the radical work that takes place in them. And here I would also mention, echoing Rick, that Indigenous studies is crucial. And it's really a disgrace that CUNY does not have a stronger Indigenous studies program throughout the university. And we really need that, and it needs to not be a program centered within the university. It needs to be accountable to the city's Indigenous people and Indigenous movements, both within CUNY and beyond. And the next demand is we demand the abolishment of the relationship between CUNY, the NYPD, ICE, and the US military. Free CUNY is an abolitionist organization, and alongside many other abolitionist groups such as CUNY for Abolition and Safety, there's work taking place to cut those ties, and there has been for a long time. As long as CUNY has had policing and ties to the military, students and community members have resisted those. And so here I just want to uplift a couple petitions that you can very quickly sign, organized through CUNY for Abolition and Safety. One is to rename a building at Hunter College for Audre Lorde, who is a longtime CUNY student and professor, and that would set the tone for deeper decolonization of the university. And also a petition to cut a contract with Corecraft, which is a company that CUNY has ties to, buys products from, and that company uses the labor of incarcerated people. And the final demand is we demand CUNY redirect funds from CUNY security and peace officers to the creation of public free spaces for students, faculty, and the community. And so cutting ties with the military and joining a long history of anti-militarization protests at CUNY to the tearing down of gates and opening up enclosed public spaces, because this is the people's university, we're thinking through an if and how it would be possible to decolonize CUNY, which I think means centering the demand of land back in our organizing in the university as we imagine its future. That land back has to remain central, otherwise, what are we even doing? So now I just want to say a few things about how to get involved with Free CUNY. So on social media, and these will be dropped in the chat, you can plug in. We're on Instagram at Free CUNY, Twitter at CUNY free with a little underscore in between, and Facebook at Free CUNY. And we also have an email list. And the first meeting of our semester, where we will be explaining more about our tuition strike, building up events and campaigns throughout that, is going to take place on Friday, February 12th at 4 p.m. And that will be a remote meeting over Zoom, which I assume will be the case for the remaining part of the semester. So thank you for including Free CUNY in this event, and I'll turn it back over to Coco.
Lucian, thank you so much. That was powerful. We are now going to hear from North Bronx Collective. I invite Lori Kim, Alicia, and Vani to share your experiences.
I'm Vani. I'll get us started today. So I teach in the English department at Lehman College and live in the Northwest Bronx. So I'm going to talk a little bit just to get us started about the formation of the collective. So we all initially connected with each other around the transit fare hike protests in the winter of 2019-2020. And we kind of shared an interest in doing like really local grassroots work around the links among policing, gentrification, and food insecurity, and taking a lead from longstanding groups in the Bronx, like Take Back the Bronx, which has really been doing super important work to fight gentrification in the South Bronx, understanding gentrification as a form of local colonization. And so some of the kind of motivating factors when we formed were the CUNY Food Insecurity Report, which came out about a year ago and showed that close to 1 in 4 students at CUNY had experienced food insecurity at some point, and yet the overwhelming majority weren't connected with things like the campus food banks, and some campuses didn't have food banks. At the time, there were movements at several campuses, including Hunter, to actually open food pantries. And if you read about and Free CUNY was really central, at Hunter. I'm lucky to get to do some work with them as well. The administration actually opened a Starbucks in the site that the students wanted for the food pantry. So that gives you a sense of kind of CUNY's priorities around issues of food insecurity. There was also just the question of ongoing food scarcity in the Bronx itself. And so Hunts Point came up earlier. And even though I believe it's during the strike, I remember hearing it's the biggest food port in the world, actually. And yet, because of the history of redlining and institutional racism, the Bronx has a really serious problem with food scarcity. And during COVID, that was really exacerbated, obviously. Around the same time that we formed too, the New York Botanical Garden was starting to gentrify a street called Webster Avenue that's near the garden. And so we were also thinking about things like, what is the access to local green space? And then what's the connection between green space and gentrification? Since then, Lehman College has actually partnered with local CEOs and developers to start begin to launch a real estate certificate. So I think it's important to think about how closely tied CUNY is to some of these movements here in the Northwest Bronx, but also around the city, as we also saw at KCC when the urban farm was under attack, which Free CUNY was also doing amazing work to fight. So when COVID hit, our work shifted immediately and dramatically towards trying to address food scarcity in an area where at the time that we formed, there were no food distribution points. And it was also an area with some of the highest rates of COVID in the city. So it began with mutual aid and deliveries to people's houses. moved into food distribution, which we were holding once a week, really lines around the block every week kind of for distributing food, and started working closely with some local grassroots food organizations, including the group Woke Foods, which I encourage you to look up. But it led to some difficult decisions. Like, we'd been getting hundreds of meals from an organization called World Central Kitchen, and then we learned that they were in collusion with the police and ICE. And so La Morada, which is really a fixture in kind of immigration organizing in the South Bronx, and has been feeding thousands of people since COVID hit, cut ties formally with World Central Kitchen and released a really strong statement. We did the same. I'll share this statement in the chat once I'm done. There are a number of right-wing and white supremacist groups in the North Bronx, and over the summer during the protests, there were nooses found in Van Cortlandt Park. So the work also included building with other organizations to hold a 4th of July kind of liberation party and march that went by, several sites of local struggle, and ended with like a big vegan picnic at in the park, where we also smashed a piñata that looked like a KKK person. So that was really cathartic, and it felt like a way to take back the space after the nooses were found. But this work has really kind of gotten us to think about what is the long-term work of addressing this collusion of green space with colonization, gentrification, and with the lack of long-term sustainable kind of spaces for gathering, for thinking about growing food, growing medicine, growing the things we need, and spaces that are really controlled and administered by the people, that are community controlled. And so we shifted our work towards picking up a project that a group called Friends of Tibbet's Tail had been working on a number of years ago, to clean up a space on Bailey Avenue here in the North Bronx it's called Tibbet's Tail. And so this has been, and Alicia and Kim are going to speak a bit about this in a minute, but I'll just say it's really kind of forced a shift in long-term thinking for me, thinking about what is it to work in a space that the city has really abandoned and has been full of trash and not really open or usable, but in which a number of medicinal plants like burdock are growing, but which we can't actually use as medicine because there's so much lead in the soil. So in a context like that, what does it mean to try to heal and remediate the soil, and to do work that to do just like really consistent cleanups, which we've been doing them about twice a week, and kind of connect with people and rebuild social fabric through the act of doing that work together, which is a different kind of organizing than I think I've ever done. And it's led me to reflect a lot on kind of what does it mean in thinking about, land and liberation, to be building and healing a space so that you want to defend it, really. And then to have a space kind of calling you to work on it alongside each other, and to think about rebuilding social fabric in the process. So the too long didn't read version of this, I think, that I'll end with is just that I think in the context of this conversation, I really, this has been something I've been thinking about lately. I want us to think about CUNY movements as city movements and vice versa, and thinking about how, this work around food insecurity, gentrification, policing, in the area is work that kind of dismantles these categories. And that's not to erase power or these real town and gown divides, but it's to think about how, I guess, if we're going to invoke the language of decolonization, histories of decolonization, then it just requires that we reshape our imaginations to see how these categories bound our work, and how we kind of need to dismantle the categories in order to work more closely alongside each other. And two examples I'll give of that are just, when City College had the occupation in the 60s, it being renamed Harlem University, or when the crash group at Hunter College fought back against CUNY's, like, kind of courting Amazon to come to Queens, when the way they talked about how CUNY students live and work in Queens. And this would be, and it's not just a bad corporate partnership for the university, but it means it's actually a direct attack on the homes of people who live and work in CUNY. So I'll pass it off to Alicia now, or to Kim now, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thank you, Ronnie. And thank you everyone who is here in space right now, everyone who organized this space, everyone who is working behind the scenes on this space. It's beautiful. My full government is Lori Kim Alexander. I was born and raised in Jamaica. I moved to this country a while ago, been bouncing around. I've been out of the city for a long time. I came back after 15 years. I landed in the Bronx. It was the only place for poor people left. This city has been bombed out by gentrification, and it is painful to see. Rachel, you have the pictures? Thank you. So I wrote a thing. It's small and short. I'm going to read the thing while you look at the pictures, and then we're going to talk about it for a second. So, Rachel, if you just move through while I'm speaking, these pictures are self-explanatory. But, you know, when we focus on green spaces, we often leave out the spaces where Black and brown folks live. Also, green space revival often doesn't look like anything that serves us or nature well. Tibbetts Tale is a restorative space for community, which includes the natural world. It is a space where justice can look like healing, and where we can realize that our neighbors are also trees, squirrels, umpteen species of birds. New York City is still wild, and the Bronx is its greenest borough. So this is one of the ongoing issues that we face: consistent garbage that has been there for years and years. But you saw the work that was done, right? You saw it. And speaking to what Vani said, you see here raspberry, stinging nettle. These are very powerful healing herbs. You see who's moving the space. This is an organization run by Black and brown women. And we have been in this space working with land. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes out of my time. Close your eyes a little bit. I invite you to do that. And when you think about green space, what does it look like? Is it wild, like you're here in the morning? Is it manicured? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? Does it make you feel free? I invite you to be free in the images that you just saw today. I also invite you to listen to your breath. Take a deep breath in and breathe out. That's what I do, and you can flutter your eyes open when you're ready. That's what I do when I walk into Tibbetts Tale. It is that crack in the sidewalk where greenery comes through, where healing chamomile grows that you may overlook, right? That you don't know is chamomile because nobody ever taught you. So a lot of times we're left with more questions when we see spaces like this. What does it mean to decolonize a space on colonized land? What does it mean to decolonize ourselves while we decolonize in a space on uncolonized land? What does it mean to connect with the fact that this land was once indigenous land, and your indigeneity may be oceans away in terms of time and space, right? So this healing space is crucial to the survival of our neighbors. And again, when I say neighbors, I always mean the non-humans and the humans, the rats and the roaches and the ants and the pigeons and the endangered species. I saw 2 endangered species in Tibbetts Tale. right? One of which is a woodpecker that needs old growth. There's no old growth in Tibbetts tail, but there's old growth in Van Cortlandt. So those birds have space because of these slivers of green. We have space because of these slivers of green. So this is one way to push past concrete to the real that we were born to. So I don't want to take up more time, but in those hard moments, maybe think about your connection with green and breathe into it. Thank you for the space. Alicia, come through.
Hi, thank you very much, Vani and Kim. So I'm going to conclude our short presentation with latest developments. And to emphasize that we are a group of women identifying people, and that means a lot, particularly when we reflect on the knowledge and practices of the people of this still indigenous land, and indigeneity in different parts of the world, and the matrilineal importance of that. So the latest developments are that they want to shut us down. And I think that goes a lot with when we are thinking of decolonization, we also have to think about laws and how laws are a story, a set and collection of stories, set up to disenfranchise and to continue the stealing of land, right? So we were just hit up with a letter from the Bronx commissioner, you know, with the threat of shutdown. And this is after a lot of love and a lot of labor, and all of us working under these ideas of the importance, particularly now, as the world is forever, well, it has been forever changed. I mean, hello, 5 centuries, so I can't even say that. But COVID has been a huge shake and for all of us, letting us know that, you know, in some way or another, time is running out. So I could take you through the details of why they're shutting us down, but or want to shut us down. But it has a lot to do with, the irony of this is that it has a lot to do with the public trust doctrine, which is a common law that is meant to protect land from other entities and to protect land for the enjoyment of people. So since we didn't know we had to ask permission to build planters for plants that are specific for pollinators. So specifically, because the dirt is as hard as concrete, and a lot of our work has been on doing soil remediation. Soil remediation, what we've been doing is a lot of cutting and dropping. So for example, there's an abundance of burdock, that's medicine that we can't use due to the lead that's in the soil. So we've been cutting and dropping and kind of letting the earth do its own work of decomposing and composting it on its own, so that insects that you would imagine would be doing a lot of that work for us, right, are unable to do it because of the solid state and the toxic state of the soil. But nonetheless, our more than human beings know how to heal the earth much better than we do. So these planters have blueberries and raspberries, different and other things that we have planned, so that butterflies and our family of bees and green hornets that are there can continue their work. So briefly, we'll put our information in the chat so that if we need to rally some bodies to help us protect our land, or not our land, but our land, because we purposely don't have a lock on it. We want to keep it open because there are people who practice their spiritual beliefs on Tibbet's Tail, and we want to respect that. And we don't want to continue the colonial tactic of like locking and chaining things and keeping people out after they've taken things away. So I think Vani can put our information there. She hasn't already. So you can, yeah, reach out to us. Thanks very much.
Alicia, Kim, and Vani, thank you for these powerful lessons that you shared and these visions that you talked us through. Last, but definitely not least, I invite Karina and Reiko with Rank and File Action to share about your work.
Thank you so much for that, Connor. And I want to also, both Reiko and I would like to thank you, Wendy Subway, the other organizers, as well as the amazing translators. And I want to thank all of our comrades here with us tonight for those amazing and powerful presentations. I've just learned so much, and I'm really looking forward to continuing in this discussion. So I'm just going to begin. I just wanted to read off the first paragraph of our rank and file. I'm going to put it in the chat box in a moment, our program, and then go over a little bit of it, and Reiko and I will both discuss some of our own organizing with and around RAFA. So rank and file action brings together workers at the City University of New York to engage in participatory, inclusive, democratic unionism and grassroots militant working class organizing. We fight for a fully funded, fully equitable, free, open, and decolonized people's university that supports the needs of students, staff, and faculty. Crucially, we believe that we need to center our struggle for racial justice and against the multiple oppressions harming our communities and in our labor organizing. So that's the first paragraph of our program, which I hope that condenses what follows, but I hope you can read the whole program of RAFA and get to know and hopefully join us. In a nutshell, we believe in grassroots, campus-based organizing and aim to keep pushing our union leaders from the bottom with more militant action through campus organizing, as well as through the PSC's unions, the PSC Union's Delegate Assembly and other forms of organizing. We have strong participation of full-time faculty and staff, although a majority of current RAFA members are adjunct faculty, graduate workers, and other contingent workers who are represented by the Professional Staff Congress, but who are frustrated by the sort of overlooking or marginalizing of our issues and by our poverty wages and the persistence of the exploitative two-tier system at CUNY. We recognize that our power as workers relies on our ability to control and withhold our labor. Therefore, RAFA is committed to building the unity, solidarity, and democratic participation necessary to carry out successful job actions, including strikes. And capable of winning ultimately our demands for a fully funded, anti-racist, decolonized, and free CUNY. Central to this is organizing together with with students and community members beyond the university, building on the shoulders of the radical student movements for Black and Puerto Rican liberation, grassroots anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist student organizing. We recognize that our struggles are deeply interconnected, and it is only by working together that we can win a radically transformed CUNY and connected a radically transformed New York and hopefully even beyond. As you will see, RAFA's program centers decolonization and abolition in our vision for this radical transformation. And there are 4 aims that we would like to highlight. One, the first is our support for full funding and a free and open CUNY. as it was until 1967, when it started charging tuition after the student body became majority Black, Latinx, and Asian. We stand firmly against all tuition and fee increases, as well as against racist and classist standardized admissions testing, which disproportionately harm and discourage low-income working class students of color. Secondly, our support for a faculty that is representative of the diversity of New York and the CUNY student body. So we demand the university must recruit, hire, retain, tenure, and support more Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, starting with people already employed by the CUNY system in adjunct and other precarious positions, in well-compensated permanent faculty positions. Thirdly, a decolonized CUNY. Of course, that includes decolonizing the curriculum and pedagogy, as many of my co-panelists have already discussed, as well as fully funding the centers and programs that have been doing decolonial and anti-racist work for decades. Also, in order to ensure, as Coco discussed in the intro, that decolonization is not just a metaphor, we must recognize that the city and the university that we fight for were built on the unceded land of the Lenape peoples and through the erasures and exclusions of Lenape communities. So Rafa rejects this erasure and believes that we must work to dismantle and redress the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism and to ensure that CUNY does not contribute to further colonial displacements of racialized and oppressed communities through real estate speculation, gentrification, and barriers to access. And then fourth and finally, and I'm going to come back to this later, so I won't talk about this now, but an abolitionist university, which I'll try to make the connection with point out really the fundamental connection between this and decolonization. So the reasons we want to highlight these aspects, the reasons we decided to highlight these aspects, is that they are often marginalized in mainstream labor spaces that fail to appreciate that racism is a labor issue. And as Robin Kelly recently argued in a recent piece, that anti-racism and class solidarity are not trade-offs. We are happy and proud that Rafa as a whole has adopted a program that truly centers decolonial and anti-racist efforts as part of our labor organizing. Now, because Rafa also focuses on the campus-based actions, we want to report on some of our personal experiences on our campuses. My comrade Reiko will report on the decolonizing the curriculum and faculty hiring goals of Rafa from the Hunter College front. And then after that, I will report on the abolitionist goals of Rafa and discuss their connection to our support for decolonization. Reiko.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Corina, for intro. And I won't repeat the same thanks that Corina mentioned, but I really thank everybody here, and I've been really enjoying the talk. So I'm Reiko. I am an immigrant and adjunct faculty in the film media department at the Hunter College. I teach documentary history, for which I've been working on decolonizing my own syllabus as well as myself over the years, inspired by Fanon. And so I found Rick and Lawrence's talk super inspirational and feel humbled that I have a long way to go. And I also teach resistance cinema called Third Cinema from Latin America, indigenous communities, Africa, Asia, Middle East, and BIPOC communities in the global north. I'm also a mother and a member of the community vegetable garden in Ocean Hill, which is led by amazing Black woman in this neighborhood. And my Japanese cousins' kids living in Arizona, Japanese and Navajo, going to Navajo school. And I'm a member of Hunter Adjunct Alliance, which is a sister group of Rafa, I'm sorry, the noisy neighborhood, through which we try to connect and organize with fellow adjuncts. At Hunter, more than 70% of undergrads are BIPOC. However, at many departments, more than 70% of faculties are white. After the police murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, students at Hunter MFA in film media, as well as studio art, stood up and demanded hiring of more BIPOC, especially Black faculty, and decolonizing the curriculum. In film media...
Rico, request to slow down a bit.
Oh,
so
okay.
the interpreters
Sorry.
can get more dramatic. It's okay.
Sure. Okay. Sure. So in film media, the student uprising led to the shutdown of the department listserv. Also, Black Student Union wrote a strong letter to the dance department when the BIPOC dance classes such as hip hop 2, yoga, Chinese social dance were cut for this semester. And in response, they reinstated hip hop 2, so which was great, but it's not all of them. In the meantime, the Center for Puerto Rican Studies is now under attack at Hunter. Hunter is reportedly defunding it by $1 million and has already pushed its longtime director into retirement. Also, MA program at the theater department is being eliminated because in Dean Polsky's words, it doesn't fit the profile of a priority graduate program in arts and sciences where we stress degrees that directly lead to professional marketable skills. So those priorities are to please the corporate funders, while the CUNY's Board of Trustees, hired by the governor and mayor, don't ask enough money to fully fund CUNY, as Lucian articulated before. So critical thinking in the arts and ethnic studies, as we know, is not valued in their plan to further corporatizing CUNY. It is actually nothing new, and I would like to share the images. Host disable. Can I share screen?
Yeah, I'll make you a host. Give me 1 second.
Okay, great.
Okay, you should be good.
Thank you. So I just want to share some images of the students, working. So here it is, current slide. Okay, let me see. So yeah, so just like the Puerto Rican students movement in the 60s, Asian American students at Hunter has been fighting for their rights to study about their histories and heritages for decades. Hunter students are 34% Asian, yet Asian American Studies program, the only one of its kind in the current, in the entire CUNY system, born out of student activism in the 90s, is not recognized as a department, and students cannot major in Asian American Studies. Through our actions at Hunter, I have worked with many amazing students from CRUSH, that I think Vani mentioned, which is Coalition for Revitalizing Asian American Studies at Hunter. Their activism saved the program in 2017, but their respected and capable founding director, Jennifer Hayashida, on the non-tenured line, she was not tenured, was removed. So most of the CRUSH students have graduated since, but I would never forget how they fought hard despite the constant harassment by the campus police and how they supported us always. So speaking of the police, in 2019, we organized a peaceful grading event in order to make the adjuncts unpaid labor visible. Many students joined to support us and studied in with us. A few days before the event, I heard from my department chair that Hunter's diversity dean, who works directly under the president, and the compliance officer, who is Hunter's lawyer, were looking for me. I was interrogated by them. They wanted to know who the ringleader was. So I have no photos for, when we arrived at the location, but there are like 7 or 8 campus safety officers who are waiting for us, at least one with a gun. And a few of them watched us for the entire afternoon. So you can see one there, but there are several of them circulating throughout the event. And 7 Chaos Strike is a former, how Rafa started. So we were formerly 7 Chaos Strike. So CUNY spent $59 million for security services in 2019, among which Hunter spent the most at $6.9 million. I wonder what CUNY security services budget looks like during the pandemic. Hunter President Jennifer Robb was the head of the city's landmark commission before she became the president 20 years ago, without any prior experience in higher education, with the huge support of then Mayor Giuliani. She's a capable fundraiser with strong corporate ties and known for fair politics. In light of the Black Lives Matter, she organized a seminar series entitled Speaking of Justice with excellent speakers, but there were no open discussions about concrete changes. In the midst of a mass layoff of thousands of adjuncts at CUNY, Hunter recently hired 10 new, diverse full-time faculty, 3 of whom were for computer science department. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay. So what can we do to ensure that BIPOC faculty hiring and decolonizing the curriculum at CUNY don't get co-opted by the corporate agenda of our colleges in this shock doctrine time? Will the union or our department fight for us? Not unless we keep pushing them. As a Haitian proverb goes, stone in the water don't know the suffering of the stone in the sun. I feel the key is the student-faculty coalition to pressure both the department, school, and the union from the bottom as stones in the sun. We have to find a way to influence them in what kind of BIPOC faculty they are hiring and for how they work on decolonizing the curriculum. RAFA is about campus grassroots organizing to me. With the help of my adjunct comrades, I plan to help concerned students from various art disciplines at Hunter to connect and exchange ideas. I also want to find more comrades across titles to organize for anti-racist and anti-exploitation actions at Hunter, just like the Brooklyn folks are doing, and make sure that the concrete changes are discussed and happen. And thank you everybody for listening, and I'll throw back to Corina now.
Thank you, Reiko. I just wanted to use very quickly the time that remains to talk about some of the central contradictions and tensions and underpinning CUNY as a public university in relation to our shared decolonial agenda. So on the one hand, it is a site where the logics, mechanisms, and power of the carceral state and racial capitalism more broadly are reproduced, but it is also indisputably, as so many comrades here have discussed, a place of fierce resistance. And we have a long and amazing history at CUNY of decolonial, anti-racist, abolitionist struggle going back to the 60s and even earlier. Most recently, student-led organizations have, like Free CUNY and represented here, and CUNY for Abolition and Safety, and worker student organizations like the Anti-Racist Coalition at Brooklyn College have been leading the way, organizing protests and political education events around abolition. One of CAS's campaigns includes a petition demanding CUNY administration divest from the prison industry and eliminate its contracts with Corecraft, which utilizes prison slavery to produce its products. It also has called for the abolition of the University Public Safety Office, which a call that, as I'll talk about in a moment, we also back. RAFA itself organized a teach-in on police terror last spring, as well as participated in several protests over the summer in the context of the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor uprising. We also drafted an important resolution that was eventually adopted for the Professional Staff Congress, the PSC, to not only kick the cops off campus, but also kick cop unions out of the AFL-CIO, the National Labor Federation, with which our parent union is affiliated. RAFA comrades and I have also co-written an article as part of our decolonial and abolitionist organizing efforts, and I'm going to put that in the chat in a moment, which I think Boyd already did, which maps out the history and contemporary and multiple forms of CUNY's collaboration with the institutions of organized violence. This article focuses on the recent hiring of Andre Brown as Executive Director of Public Safety, an office, as I said earlier, that we, and as I'm sure many others here tonight, believe should be abolished. Brown's decades of experience in the Air Force, the Pentagon, the State Department, and Administration for Children's Services were presented by the administration as experiences qualifying him to oversee safety at CUNY, showing their complete disregard for the substance of demands raised by the anti-racist and abolitionist organizing at CUNY in the context of the uprising of the summer and the current health crisis. Our article highlights the histories of resistance and struggle that we have been discussing here. We have just published this piece, as I said, on CUNY struggle. Of course, I'm sure it is obvious to everyone here, but it bears repeating that the decolonial and abolitionist agendas are inextricably linked. Any meaningful program of decolonization that challenges the systems of exploitation, dispossession, and violence that racial capitalism and US empire are founded upon will be fought by the powers that be. It's not by accident that our university is militarized and heavily imbricated in the institutions of organized violence. Through these relationships, the university contributes to the attempts to discipline, control, repress, as well as co-opt and incorporate us as workers and students in an attempt to block decolonial, socialist, abolitionist, and other liberatory futures from being imagined and built. This includes not only the collaboration with and presence of the NYPD, ICE, Homeland Security that have been used to spy on and repress our especially working class, Black and Brown students and workers in the name of providing security or fighting terrorism. It is not only the state, of course, that targets CUNY students and workers with surveillance, but also organizations like CAMRA and Canary Mission that do the bidding of US empire by harassing and defaming, especially Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim students and faculty at CUNY. They attempt to limit academic freedom on campus.
A little bit more slowly, sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No,
sorry about
okay.
that.
Thank you.
I got carried away. They attempt to limit academic freedom on campus by targeting anyone who challenges dominant narratives, legitimizing Israeli apartheid and settler-colonial rule in Palestine in our classrooms and other spaces. Most recently, a Zionist smear campaign fueled vicious cyberbullying against Nardine Kiswani, a Palestinian CUNY law student. The initial response of CUNY Law was to post and then delete multiple messages lending credibility to the racist attack on Nardine. The university administration eventually changed tack after students and organizations banded together. So this, demonstrates how crucial this these forms of organizing are for protecting us. It turned out that cyberbullying was fueled by a cell phone app called ACT-IL, which assigns users missions to target non-compliant educators and students, including pre-written notes sent to university administration. The app was developed by not surprisingly, former Israeli intelligence officers and partly financed by the recently deceased casino billionaire Sheldon Adelson. I also have my own experience with a camera-funded student attack, but I don't want to take up any more time. I'm happy to discuss this in more detail later in the discussion. As decolonial and abolitionist student and worker organizations, we need to be aware of these tactics and figure out ways to be on the offensive rather than just defensive. Decolonizing the university is about linking knowledge generation and learning to a liberatory project. It is about upending the status quo of power relations. It is about land-backed sovereignty and self-determination, reparations, redistribution, radical democratization, true equality, and liberation. The police and policing, of course, are designed to protect private property and uphold the unequal relations of power and forms of accumulation that underpin racial capitalism. So connecting these dots is crucial to our resistance, which is why I'm so grateful again to Connor and Wendy Subway for creating this space for us to link up with one another today and learn from one another. And I'm grateful again to everyone participating in this forum for sharing your knowledge and experience. I hope this will just be the beginning of a much deeper conversation and conspiring together to decolonize and radically transform CUNY, New York, and beyond, and one that will continue in the months and years to come. Thank you.
All right, Karina and Reiko, thank you. And just to be able to honor and hold the amazing amount of wisdom and perspective and radical lucid fire that was just shared. So I feel like a sponge that has been absorbing so much water. There's just no more space, and yet I'm still thirsty. So right now, I am elated to get to hear from everyone else who is here in this space with us. I encourage you, please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat or question in the chat. If you may also wish to share some thoughts on the mic, then feel free to put your name and some kind of demonstration that you wish to speak. Also, if there's anyone who is here as a Spanish speaker, if you wish to write your thoughts in the chat or questions, then we can translate it for the speakers as well. So we got to hear several themes across these presentations. So now is the collective work to try to shape and to continue to ask and to try to form some reflections to keep us moving through these various parts of decolonial work. So what's coming to mind for people who are in the room today? So there's a question already getting us started. Ways how to withhold labor in order to transform the system as part of decolonizing CUNY and New York City. And maybe we can get to hear a couple of thoughts or questions from people in the room, and then we'll be able to kick it back to the presenters. So don't be shy. If there are any questions that are coming to mind about these campaigns, different organizations, or if there are visions for how we can be collaborating more to support each other's work in 2021 and beyond, this is the space to share. And feel free to put your thoughts in the chat or to put your name in chat to be invited to speak. So Vani is sharing inspiration with the Columbia tuition strike. You all may have heard that Columbia University, there are currently several thousand students who are launching a tuition strike. Also Manchester in England, also Chicago schools. The question of how to map the power of how the university functions to challenge the university through withholding tuition or through withholding grades or other kinds of labor is perhaps one way how to challenge the settler colonialism in how the university functions. Howard University is also going on tuition strike as well. A couple more things that are in the chat. Are there things we can do within our various CUNY departments? Nick is saying that you're part of a nascent student faculty anti-racism committee and would like to act in solidarity. Nick, I wonder if you may wish to share a little bit more about some questions that you have on how we can support each other.
Sure. Hi. Thank you all so much. There are a lot of barriers in place for us in terms of achieving reforms. The number one barrier being that there's only 1 hour each semester when this committee is supposed to meet. Now the students are organizing a lot in preparation for that hour. But I'm curious about ways of onboarding faculty actively, especially.
Thank you. Lori Kim has a question for everyone here in the room. What does solidarity and collaboration look like for us concretely? A comrade from SUNY named Cesar is here with the Member Action Coalition, sharing the same struggle, committed to working in between CUNY and SUNY. Cesar, I wonder if you may wish to share this question of decolonizing SUNY as well, what that may look like for the Member Action Coalition, if you may wish to jump on for a moment. Or we can come back to you, Cesar, if you'd like. There's also another question, what about high school students? This seems like another form of repression in terms of thought control and stealing time and the choice of people who were forced into slavery. This is the CD saying this. Angeles from Rafa says, what does solidarity look like for me? Those inside the university need to work with organizers and activists. Angeles, would you wish to share a little more about that?
Yes, I was trying to type and I'm horrible typing.
No, it's okay. We're with you.
Thank you, everyone. It was really inspiring to hear everyone speak. And I can speak as I'm a full-time faculty member. I'm tenured also at CUNY. I teach at BMCC. But I've been doing organizing and activism outside the university for years now. And for many years, those two spheres were kind of opposite. And I guess since the pandemic, I tried to integrate these both areas and I've been working mainly with La Morada, but I really think it's important for everyone who is faculty or who has a more stable position within the university. And we need to just try to get as much resources as we can from the university and use that outside of the university. So if you, at least for me, that's one way of dismantling these barriers and of knowledge production, of knowledge consumption also, and how you produce and disseminate knowledge. So the work that we're doing now, it's basically in the South Bronx. So I was very inspired and moved by hearing, Alicia and Vani speak about that too. So.
Thank you. And the request from the interpreters for everyone to speak a little more slowly so we can all.
Sorry, ¿puedo decirlo en español? Perdón, intérpretes, hablo muy rápido. Y lo voy a hacer más lento también para el ASL, entiendo. Que la solidaridad para mí, para una persona, yo soy profesora, tengo un trabajo a tiempo completo, tengo tenure también, entonces tengo una estabilidad laboral como que parece como impensable en estos días, y me parece que a quienes tenemos esas posiciones también tenemos que tratar de aprovechar y sacar todos los recursos que podamos de la universidad, sobre todo una universidad pública como es CUNY, que es una universidad de la ciudad, es una universidad de todos, ¿verdad? Y usar esos recursos afuera de la universidad. Entonces este año he estado tratando de integrar más mi activismo y las cosas que hago afuera de la universidad con las cosas que hago dentro, trabajando sobre todo con La Morada en South Bronx. Entonces que había sido muy importante escuchar al North Bronx Collective también hoy. Y soy parte de Rafa. I forgot to say that I'm a Rafa member as well. So kudos to Corina and Reiko.
Thank you, Angeles. And maybe I can offer another question, and then we can invite the presenters to share some thoughts that are coming up from these various threads that people are activating. This is a time of great transitions. There is a new president in the settler-colonial government of the United States. This is also a time of, here in New York City, the weather is very punishing for any kind of outside gatherings. So we are still reaching towards each other, even as it's more difficult to share a common space. And so I wonder if the presenters could speak a little bit about the time of this decolonial work. So what does the spring look like? How can we be reaching towards each other across these different campaigns and organizations into the summer, into perhaps broader vaccination of COVID-19, and ways that we can try to pressure the settler-colonial government and pressure a settler-colonial CUNY administration through looking into the summer, the spring, the summer, and then into the fall of this year. So a couple of different questions, and want to invite the presenters to speak with what's coming up.
Well, I'll chime in on, I guess I'm reacting to a lot of what was said, but also to what is coming up. And I guess I have to reflect a little bit as well. I think as a professor, I'm just now coming into a point where radicalism is being featured in my pedagogy, in my work as a professor. And it's so easy for that to be lost. So the very process of graduate school, not just graduate school, but undergrad, but graduate school, then obtaining the means to support yourself is very much part of the process of supporting the status quo. And so much of my childhood and early adult years was surrounded by radicals who find no place in the university. So my most substantive teaching and learning came from curriculums and people who would not exist in the university as we know it. So it's really me paying homage at this point and realizing so much of what I'm learning in very good texts, abstract thinking, colonialism, racial capitalism, all these words, I learned it in my community. And I'm getting back to a point where I'm trying to do honor and justice to those people who mentored. So the conversation about breaking down the lines between campus and community is the starting point. And if so much of my schooling got me to a place where now at 41 years old, I'm trying to refine myself. What are we doing to our students? And I think the most important thing that we can do, and this will affect anything that comes forward, is that we have to give them the space and the comfort and confidence to know that their thoughts are valid, and the professor or anyone else in the university system cannot suppress that. And I think that's what we're up against. You know, us in position, we have to challenge other people in positions to allow our students to speak and express in ways that will ultimately transform the university.
Thank you, Lawrence. I wonder if anyone wants to share specifically on this question. How?
To that, my name's Chirag. I'm a professor at the MCC in science. I teach biology. And I think there are some nefarious elements to the structure of curriculums that do not allow for this kind of massive awakening that's necessary for people to be able to stand up for themselves. I think there's a nefarious nature to the instruction and what it's focused on. The whole grading process leads to the outcome of a controlled mind. You look at the thick textbooks with the long English words, it's not really engaging or providing multiple means of representation on face value. So it really needs to have a complete breakdown and rebuild to make it so that it's equitable. We keep failing the same color students at the same rates over and over again. I did a little bit of a difference because of the pandemic and the crises, and I got really, really put down for it. And so I'm in a position where I can take that hit, but I'm not tenured, and I'm still early stage researcher, and it was just really sad to see how much resistance there is to the good fight. But this moment and this group, I never thought I would ever see something like this in my lifetime in this country. And so I want to thank everyone here. I feel empowered, and I will continue on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chirag. Lori Kim, I see you. Please share your thoughts.
Thank you. Coco, it's just so nice to hear I see you. I just want to say that. So springtime, what do you think about when you think about springtime? You think about greenness coming back, right? So we're ramping up our work in the spring. Right now, we're resting as the land rests, and the work is really it's really intense. So when there's only a few of us, it's backbreaking. Yeah, it's painful. We walk over there. We walk about 20-something minutes. Walk up and down a big hill with a whole heap of tools. And I'm not saying that for you to feel sorry for us, because it's real good exercise. But it means that when we get there, we're already tired. And we're tired from the week. We work on, we have been working on a Thursday and Saturday schedule. But if you are in the Bronx and you are with the radical work, right? And you want to actually develop a praxis. And so, and we're using lots of big words on here, right? So that's another thing. We're about popular education, right? And what that means is that we talk to folks the way that they need to be spoken to hear the message that is going to move them, right? In the way that they've already moved the city. Let's be clear on that.
Right.
Let's be clear on that. So, so just really, we need bodies, and we need like-minded people in the struggle with us. So it's a way for you to connect with space. And, you know, Rick said in the chat, people dropping gems in the chat. If you're not paying attention, pay attention. But, and I'm sorry to speak so fast. If you are not paying attention, please pay attention to the chat. But Rick just dropped a gem about traditional indigenous knowledge. You know, traditional ecological knowledge is vast, deep, rich, storied, varied, is dynamic. Black and brown people have always been a part of the land. All of us have always been a part of the land. But look how many of us are afraid. If a spider come in your house right now, what you gonna do? Right? So let's think about what that message that spider is coming to tell you. It might just be, it's cold. Or it might be, you've got friends in here that you don't even know about. I'm about to take them out. I'm gonna take out all the pests for you. You know? Let's think about that, right? Let's think about the fact that a lot of us walk into green space, and if it isn't manicured, we feel a shift. Some of us are scared and afraid and resist. So when we think about decolonizing space, it is a physical process as well, right? When we decolonize, we have to think about it holistically. So that's a long, long way to say, come through if you're ready for healing.
Thank you, Kim. And Alicia and Vani, before we kick it to some of the other panelists, would you both like to share a little bit as well? Any concluding thoughts?
Listen to your spiders.
Yes.
Have food out. Not food particularly, but birds really need water. Fresh water is really important for birds. So put some water out for the birds. Stop manicuring your lawns. Stop picking up the leaves. Leave the leaves on the land, because that's part of how the earth heals itself. And come through. Just hit us up whenever you're around. Even if like you're not in the Bronx and you just want to like do some backbreaking work because you feel like you've been sitting on your ass all quarantine, just hit us up. We'd love to have you visit. Thank you.
I'll echo that. And I think that the situation Alicia mentioned around, you know, parks kind of coming for the space because there are planters in it, made me think about, you know, stories I've read about people starting gardens in NYCHA and NYCHA pouring bleach on them, and just the way that land is so controlled by the cities that we live in, and how inspired I've been by the small ways that people have been trying to kind of heal and work with spaces that have been actively cut off from communities and from the public. And I think from what I've learned from people in the space, that can be something as small as trying to grow seeds on your windowsill, and you know, just kind of rebuilding a relationship towards growing things yourself. And I know a lot of people will say, I'm not a plant person, or will say, you know, I don't want to do that. And I think that kind of pushing through that discomfort is part of the work, because yeah, I think when all is said and done, we're going to need to know how to grow our own food and to feed each other. And many of us, I think, have already been doing that for a long time, just not calling it decolonization, just thinking about what families do or what neighborhoods or communities do for each other. So please come through the spring. Please follow us and stay in touch. And we'd love to meet and build with you all.
Thank you all. And Rick, I'm seeing that you had shared in the chat a little bit more about what departments can do. I wonder if you'd be willing to share some thoughts as we're coming to an end.
Sure. I mean, that's you know, just like as Indigenous people, our knowledge is land-based. Be land-based. You know, where you stand, where you sit, where you do your work, whether it's in one department, one division, one office, that's where you start. That's where the decolonization starts. And there's things that you can do that are meaningful, and do the outreach, build those relations with Indigenous people or in your community. If you don't know exactly who to contact, work with people who will be able to give you ideas about who to be in relation with. And you know, and we're relational people. So if you have a chance to build those relations, then you start working together, you start gaining insights together, you start finding ways that all this knowledge that you're building together can be brought into the daily work you do, whether it's the curriculum, the pedagogy, just the day-to-day activities, any small way in which you every single way in which you walk through the world, and all the ways in which you understand the work you're going to be doing and the relations you're building. You can do that together, and it can start, as I say, just where you are. Yeah, yes, certainly we want to change the entire systems. We want to change the entire CUNY system. We want to change, on a broad structural level. Absolutely, that needs to be done. But oftentimes you can start to do that where you are, and you build momentum, and you keep gaining strength, and you create the examples that other people are inspired by.
Thank you for that, Rick. And thinking about these footholds, these ways of building power, I'm curious, Lucian, if you wish to share some of these footholds that you see that Free CUNY and youth in CUNY in New York City in general can be digging in with.
Yeah, when I think about this going forward into the spring and the summer, I think about all the work that's already happening at CUNY in the city, whether it's the decolonization of the Lehman English curriculum that Vani has shared in the chat, or the students at Medgar Evers College who are organizing so that they have access to classrooms instead of mobile trailers when CUNY returns to in-person instruction, so that they have safe spaces, physically safe to study in. I'm thinking about the urban farm at Kingsborough Community College and community gardens throughout CUNY, of students at Hostos Community College who have put out a statement against the policing on their own campus. Really, the examples are endless of students organizing, community members organizing in and beyond CUNY. And I would say that I'm really excited for the possibilities of students plugging in whatever ways feel meaningful for them, finding the people who are already organizing, or maybe starting out a new project because they want to start a community garden on their campus, and maybe it only takes them and two of their friends. And yeah, I'm just really excited to see some of the new, smaller kind of creative ways that students and workers and community members organize in and around this tuition strike, and other larger projects that are taking place throughout the city, the continuation of mutual aid and community care throughout the pandemic, organizing against evictions, and against policing and imprisonment in the city. Yeah, so I think one of the main lessons of the last year is that really the power in this university and in the city is the people's power. It's the workers and the students and the grandmothers and the gardeners and artists. And so at this time when there's a new occupant of the White House, or when we're thinking about who's in the governor's mansion or city hall, that's not really who has the power in this city and in this university. It's us.
Absolutely powerful words. Thank you. And I'm curious, Karina, if you wish to share as well, Rafa perspectives before we conclude for the night.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everything has been said and said so eloquently. I'm not sure what I can add except to say that I agree with you all. We have to start where we are, start organizing where we are. For me, as an adjunct exploited labor, that's, has been in the context of Rafa, but of course it's in different contexts for everyone else. And part of these systems of, and this is what so many of you have been saying, that these systems of oppression, racial capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, heteropatriarchy, imperialism, they're designed to alienate us, settler colonialism, from the land and from our labor, from each other. And so this is really, I really appreciate this idea of, going back to people power, remembering that we're stronger together, and they may appear to be overwhelmingly powerful at times, but we have numbers on our side, and we have to overcome our fear and bring this system down. Thank you.
Right on. And to transform entire new ways of relating in the process. And as you saw, this is not a beginning, but a continuation of so many collaborations across CUNY and the city of New York. And as Vani had shared earlier, CUNY movements are city movements are CUNY movements. And we're really trying to do what we can through this conversation, but in all of the ways that we're reaching towards each other to be able to bolster the work we're doing, but specifically to ask these questions of challenging how colonialism extracts labor from us, how it extracts resources, how it extracts even our relationships with each other. And what we're trying to do is to think big, but in looking at how we're connecting with each other in the process. And so I'm hoping that the feeling that you have throughout this event tonight, that this is a kind of feeling that you can try to spread in all of the different kinds of work that you're doing, in movement work, on and off of campus, but also in these more informal ways. This is how worlds are transformed. I want to share again immense gratitude to the speakers, the organizations that were represented here tonight. I also want to share gratitude to the ASL and Spanish interpreters who were able to perform great feats of following the brilliance along the way and to interpret, to share as far as possible. I also want to give tremendous gratitude to folks at Wendy's Subway, to Rachel and Sunny, and everyone who's a part of a really powerful community organization that it's worth following and supporting and being involved with. You can stay connected with Wendy's Subway on social media and at wendysubway.com, where you can find out more info about this residency that is concluding, including a featured readings list for further studies. And if you wish to circulate out this event recording and to view the first 6 events of the residency, you can go to Wendy's Subway YouTube channel. I want to end by asking for you all to please extend to me some hearty energies for these next few stages of this project. This spring, I'll be compiling these event recordings and the CUNY movement archival materials that we've been sharing over the past 3 months into a radiating CUNY curriculum so that these powerful histories can circulate in classrooms and study groups across CUNY, the United States, and hopefully the Americas and the Caribbean. But for it to not just be about the curriculum, but about the transformation that the curriculum helps to activate. By next year, I'll be completing my book called New York Liberation School on the rise of Black, Puerto Rican, and feminist studies and movements at the City College of New York and in New York City from the 60s to the present. I invite you to follow updates on that on my website, connorthomasreed.com. But for now, we're here at the end. Please take care of your health, and continue the learning and liberation work out there. And this is an experiment, a Zoom experiment, but as a final collective gesture and as you could say, a promise into the future, I invite everyone right now to turn on your microphones and to join me in proclaiming the title of tonight's event on the count of 3. All right, y'all ready? 1, 2, 3. Decolonize.
Colonize.
Colonize.
All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Please take care. See you soon enough.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Ashe.
Venceremos.
Venceremos. Thank you, everyone.
Chao, Coco. Gracias.
Gracias, merci.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, merci, mil gracias a todos, todas, todos.
Beautiful.
Good night, everyone. Please take care. Thank you. Rachel and Sunny, I'll be back in just a jiffy, okay?
No problem.